everybody.
What's up? What's up?
Welcome to another episode of Let's Talk About ETH Around the World. I'm Maseo, Awida Media, here with Sir Onaji B, founder of Onaji University, and the one, the only Better Call Zal, founder of the Zal. And then we got Nouns Builder Ops member, Swarthy Hatter today, the one and only, the homie I've been crashing with, killing it with here in Denver for the last month. I'm so blessed to have you on the stream today, Swarthy. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. It's a beautiful day in Denver. It's probably like 70 degrees outside. It's beautiful. I get to sit here and chat with good friends. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, you have a background, right, working in fundraising, working around government initiatives. You're thinking a lot about public goods funding and governance, which is a big reason why I'm excited to have you here in this conversation today. It's one of our early episodes of this podcast because, you know, as you were telling me, right, last year, Vitalik was publishing a little bit about the fourth estate. How do we start to hold like big companies, big government, big mob accountable? And you're working on a protocol, which ideally can support that. I think that's so moving. And I think it's perfect that we're in a podcast, right? We're doing journalism, talking about where the ecosystem is at and where it's going. And I think that you're the perfect guest to have as we really kick off this conversation about the world computer and where it's at. So yeah, I don't know, Zal, Brian, if you want to say anything before we invite you to tell us a little about your background and your journey, man.
Yeah, no, I'm just excited to be here with Swarthy Hatter and chat about some of the stuff. I think it's gonna be a great combo. Yeah, I'll shoot it over to B.
Yes, sir. Episode 2, baby. Let's talk about ETH. We out here. Let's go, y'all. Everybody tired? No, I'm just playing. We rocking, man. It's amazing to have Swarthy with us today. Got my guys, Maseo and Better Call Zal, co-host energy for Let's Talk About ETH. Episode 2, we're getting this season up and running, and it's gonna be, we got some really some fire guests lined up for you and some amazing conversations, man. So get ready to clip it all up and we'll be here. So
For sure. Excellent. So yeah, man, to kind of start off by really taking the road in on your journey, you spent years in grassroots politics before you ever touched crypto. I'm curious, What did that world teach you that crypto still hasn't figured out?
Everything is all about people in the end. And it's about people are driven by their values. So our theory of change in grassroots policy work was that real change happens in one-on-one conversations where you can relate to somebody, understand their values, and learn to, if you need to, speak their language to be able to have the right conversation. I think that Web3 blockchain can get a bit lost in the sauce, building things that maybe sometimes don't improve people's lives, and other times just were never really intended to. They're not the products and services that I've started to see really take hold as like the main narrative of blockchain in the past couple of years. I see less and less of how people are involved in these systems.
it's unfortunate for sure.
Yeah, that's interesting in this ever so changing world of AI, how that's even becoming more applicable day to day with everything.
Right. I think there's a lot of opportunity with AI to like flatten, take out a lot of the logistic or operational like overhead and flatten hierarchies. But unfortunately, I think a lot of what we see is, using AI to compound the efficiency in finance, or to operate governance without human input. And I find those things substantially less impactful.
That makes sense.
I'm curious, what specifically got you into like that world of grassroots change?
I was in sales and I hated my job. I worked in sales probably from the time I could speak. I started working at my grandmother's antique dealership when I was really young. I began promoting events, selling tickets by the age of like 16, 17. And I did that until I came out to the Midwest, out here in Colorado, in 2015, I believe. And I continued that trend. I worked with car dealerships, Comcast, and eventually I started to work in paralegal sales. I was selling back tax litigation services. So if you were behind on your taxes, like criminally so, where to the point where the IRS was coming after you, we would reach out to people we could find that liens were filed against them or their business, and offer consultation on how to negotiate away a lot of their debt. But it was a miserable job. Like I could tell myself I was helping people a little, but I really knew I wasn't. It's a very predatory industry. And so that like fable I was telling myself, it didn't hold up for very long. I was working in the job for maybe 3 to 6 months. I finally had a 401k, full health coverage. I had an employee benefits package that came with really cheap membership to Lakewood Athletic Club, which is 3 tennis courts on their ceiling and a tiki bar in the outdoor pool. So I had a lot of benefits, but I at home, where I lived in Boulder at the time, friends started to express concern for me because they becoming an asshole, and they weren't wrong. Like I was short-tempered, frustrated, and I realized that it had a lot to do with how I was spending the majority of my time doing something that I was morally and ethically opposed to, and that even if it wasn't, the fable I was telling myself was true, it certainly wasn't impactful to my society in the way that I wanted, in the way that I wanted. So I started volunteering actually to petition against fracking here in Colorado. We have some 60,000 active fracking wells and over 100,000 wells that have been drilled throughout history. And we have almost no regulatory protections against residential neighborhoods, to protect schools from the proximity of these wells. So in Greeley, Colorado, there's literally a fracking well 500 yards from an elementary school. And that causes, respiratory issues, chronic asthma, and it remains to be seen like the downstream effects of this on reproductive health. So I began petitioning to mandate a minimum setback where you had to be at least 1,500 feet away from a residential home or a municipal building, like a school or a courthouse. And what that effectively would have done, a 1,500-foot perimeter, is push fracking out of every major residential area. Because if you drew a 1,500-foot radius around every one of those buildings, the overlap would effectively push them into the western or the eastern plains. And I fell in love with that work. I had people coming up to me in tears, telling me how much it meant to them that their kids were affected by this issue, and their lives could be improved by this type of policy change. And that feeling, eventually, I looked forward to these volunteer shifts and started to pick up more and more of them. And whenever that campaign came to an end, I was offered a paid position on another grassroots outreach campaign. The grassroots outreach is really fancy speak for like either stand on the street or go up to people's door and knock on it and talk to them. And the groups I worked with primarily went directly up to people's doors and spoke with them. And when I was offered a paid position, I said yes in a moment and quit my other job because what I had found was fulfilling in a way that employee benefits would never really be.
That's awesome. I love that. Didn't know that.
Did I answer the question? Was the question, how did I get into grassroots? Cool.
Yeah, absolutely. It was, right. And I'm curious, like, how does that, it was definitely interesting. I think it's sick, right, that you're speaking to some of the externalities, right? Like being back home and like these businesses that impact us and kind of undermine us, right? Like, and that's what the fourth estate, what you've spoken to me, right, about is about how do we hold these larger institutions, the government, et cetera, accountable. And I'm curious, right, how does that experience now inform like you being in crypto? But before we even get there, right, like a lot of people that get into crypto, they get in for the money. Did you come to crypto for the money? And like, did that ever change? And if not, what did bring you into crypto that has you still be here building like, things to safeguard us as everyday people? Like that's not what my mom thinks crypto is.
Yeah, most people's experience with crypto is cursory and negative. But I'll say that I did not come to crypto for the money. After about 6 years working in grassroots outreach, I left my field to retrain myself in data science and machine learning. I followed actively Cambridge Analytica's behavior throughout the 2015 presidential race. A few professors out of Stanford and a few other notable institutions were actively following and tracing the hyperlink traffic across major websites like YouTube, Facebook, and they were flagging that there was an incredible insurgence of like self-referential, alt-right conservative content that was flooding YouTube, flooding Facebook. And eventually they were able to work it back to the source of being Cambridge Analytica. And for those who don't know, Cambridge Analytica was a European company that I think German, but don't quote me, that had about 15 to 25 employees. And what they did was scrape all of the available social media data that they could find about every American, some 180 million US Facebook accounts, and then the same thing abroad. And that's, for those who've heard of Cambridge Analytica, that's probably all you've heard, is that they were brought in front of the Senate at one point to justify or to explain their theft of Facebook's data, right? Not your data, but Facebook was the plaintiff in that. And what they effectively did was psychologically profile everybody with an advanced version of like Myers-Briggs personality assessment. And once they had that profile, they began to stimulate people with content in a way that they knew was likely to provoke a specific emotional response. Whether that emotional response was anger, or feeling disempowered, or pride, like to trigger even a nationalist pride at the right moment. The goal being to sow division, increase political tensions, and help swing the election for Donald Trump. And this isn't politics. This isn't my personal opinion. This is what happened. 6 months into 8 months into Trump's run for presidency, he fired all of his campaign staff, or they quit. The campaign staff report quitting, and Trump reports that they were fired. But regardless of how that went, immediately after, Trump contracted Cambridge Analytica to run his presidential campaign. This company did the same thing to over 106 democracies within the period of 1 year before anybody could catch on or do anything to interfere. And having worked for policy changes at 7 years at that point, I watched the Trump administration come into office and undo every policy everything that we'd accomplished in my career. Everything I'd grown to become proud of was undone within a couple of months. And I realized that if 15 people in a room somewhere could have that much impact on everyday people's lives from halfway around the world, that the theory of change that we were using within grassroots advocacy needed updating, and that the tools that we were using could definitely stand to be revisited. So I left and I re-educated myself in data science and machine learning, and immediately after leaving that education, found that centralized information infrastructure was not just a big, fun, scary group of words to say, but it was a real problem for anybody trying to utilize data science and machine learning at scale. You need a lot of data, and the only people who have that kind of data are Facebook, Amazon, Netflix, Google, Fang and Friends, Oracle. Mm-hmm. And it dawned on me that meant that the only people in the world with the ability to harness this incredible power were not the people that were going to leverage for positive social change. And so I began to experiment with IPFS peer-to-peer
interplanetary file storage. Is that what that is?
Yeah, IPFS is interplanetary file storage. And it's a peer-to-peer file sharing solution. I was experimenting with a lot of peer-to-peer technology at that time, having realized that there were options that I could cut this middleman out. And I think this was probably 2018 or 2019.
Can you say what like IPFS is for like my grandma?
Yeah, so IPFS, it allows you to save and distribute your files over a peer-to-peer network. That means person to person, without the need for a server or a centralized intermediary. So my computer talks to my neighbor's computer, talks to the next person closest to them, and eventually the packet, the data I'm trying to share gets where it's going by making a bunch of these little hops. And when you do that with, what is it, torrent, like when your mom might be familiar with torrent, LimeWire, the early 2000s, people all rage about copyright infringement with music. But what that did was it broke your file up into a bunch of tiny little pieces, and then it gave some pieces to this peer and some pieces to that peer. But nobody got the whole thing. And that was incredibly slow. It's so very, very slow, really computationally expensive too. So even if you were just participating in like helping to share someone else's file, it would could quickly drag down all the bandwidth that your home network had to offer. So your internet speeds would come to zero. You start crawling.
I didn't know I was doing that to my parents' Wi-Fi.
Yes,
I definitely remember trying to bootleg some video games. I think I got Borderlands 2 and Borderlands the pre-sequel through uTorrent on my computer, on my Mac. Shout out to my white Mac laptop in 7th grade. It was putting in work.
I think that's a really good example, though. Like, there's the problems with copyright infringement, licensing, and you're taking money out of an artist's pocket. But there's also something those were my formative years, and seeing that there were ways to share instantaneously, to circumnavigate unfair monetization policies, and for consumers to apply pressure back on those centralized institutions that were managing those monetization. I think what we saw with LimeWire and what was that one, Napster, was what precipitated like Apple Music as it is today. The fact that I can pay for a monthly stream cost and I can listen to whatever I want, because consumers just made it so painfully obvious that that's what they wanted by going around the rules and finding new technology to do so. So IPFS is different, but I would say in most cases it's a better technology that's much more useful. Right now, any number of you who are watching this are probably viewing files that are stored on IPFS on your browser. It uses cryptography, the same cryptography that we use in blockchain to secure the network and create block hashes, to take the content of your file and turn it into a simple string of numbers and letters. And then you can take that simple string of numbers and letters and you can use it to identify who on the network has your data, and then call that data to you. How this relates to blockchain, though, is that, like I said, it's the same hashes, right? So if you have a letter to your mother and you hash it, you're going to get a specific series of letters and numbers. But if you change the name at the beginning of the letter that you referred to your mother by, if you just say mama instead of mom, right? That's going to change the string of letters and numbers you get at the end. It's going to change your hash, right? So you can't lie or falsify the underlying data, and you also don't need to store it en masse to provide proof. If I knew exactly what was in the letter,
I don't want to let you get too technical. that's what but you can wrap up before we pivot a little bit. But I wanted to let you know.
Yeah. So, but if you knew exactly what the letter said, right, you could recreate the hash on your own without needing my letter. And what that boils down to is it's the same process that blockchain and Ethereum are using when they roll the previous block's history into the next block, and they parcel them together, and it creates this unbreakable, immutable chain of provenance. And so, long story short, no, I didn't come for the money. I came because I saw immediately how this could supplant centralized infrastructure and really empower individuals in a way that I don't even think at that time I had nearly like enough of an idea about how important this technology was going to become and how quickly.
and now you're on the
Love
forefront
it.
in the bear market, building for real.
Building for
I
real.
I don't take for granted that we have your brilliant technical mind here and that you are a systems architect, etc. But I think a lot of people get lost in the how, and I think I really want people to get the why, right? Like I think what you just spoke to, right? There's an opportunity to supplant these systems, right? Which disenfranchise, which take advantage of us, and I think people need to get that. And I think a lot of people check out when they start hearing the how it all works without ever necessarily fully getting right, like that issue that you spoke to. And so I'm curious, right? Having come into this space and being here for those reasons, like, what about governance? Like, why is governance where you stopped and started really spending your time?
So what I love about Ethereum is that it allows me to iterate on social contract theory, is how I like to talk about it. I see the Ethereum network and DAOs as the start of social contract theory 2.0, where you get to opt in and out of you get to opt in or out of being a member or participant or a citizen of a community based on your participation and your financial stake. And that puts the power back on the individual and makes governments now need to compete for your governance, institutions, what have you. They need to compete and be the best version of themselves in order to attract you as a user, a member, or a citizen. That was back in 2019 that I started to realize that. Then we had the bull market of 2020, 2021. It was probably the biggest run that crypto had seen up to date. And I was also unemployed after my re-education in data science and machine learning, struggling really about for 8 months, applying to dozens, if not hundreds of jobs a day. I even wrote Python code to help me automate the application process. And I had plenty of interviews. You've already heard the story before about like 6 months of interviews. Just like you get an interview with a tech company and they want to talk to you 3 weeks later, and then they want to talk to you 4 weeks later. So I've been doing that for quite a long time. And I had been exploring the financial opportunities that were beginning to sprout up in blockchain around 2020. And I was able to receive a grant from Ocean Protocol to do some minor experimentation. And that's all she wrote. I've worked in blockchain since then. I think that DAOs will eventually replace not just corporations, but all major types of institutions. But it's aspirational for sure. I don't think to date we haven't seen like a true DAO that meets the qualifications of decentralized and autonomous. And lately we've started to talk about ODOs instead of DAOs. ODOs are optimized decentralized organizations. So acknowledging that just because you are decentralized and your organization is autonomous doesn't mean that it's a good thing or a net positive.
Talk about it.
Well said. Huh.
So yeah, I just see as an extension of the work I was doing before. In grassroots policy work, what you do is you collectivize people's voices and you collectivize their finances. And then you use that collectivized message and financial reserve as leverage. It's just that simple. You would walk around I've been all over the state of Colorado for several years in every major populous district, and spent at least a week, even in the small towns in the far corners of the Rockies, knocking on doors, talking to people. And what that provided us with by the end of the summer was we were able to go meet with legislatures and say, hey, we've spoke to 500,000 people this year. 50% of the people we talked to signed our petition. And on average, during a 5-minute conversation face-to-face at the door, these people gave $60, right? And most people would probably give $1 or $5, but the larger donors would create a compelling average. And that's just basic calculus for a politician now, for a civil servant is, this are what my constituents think, my voting constituents, and this is how much money they're willing to put against my opposition if I don't go and support their interests. And it was incredibly effective. So I feel that I came to Web3 with the desire to help to continue that, to help people collectivize their voices and their resources to leverage for positive social change.
I love that. No, Swarthy, that's a bar you're cooking, man. I think, as someone like who's kind of just coming in and kind of not new to blockchain, not new to crypto, but new to like the DAO structure, the governance, side of it, and probably chat as well too. And, a lot of people watching this later on in the VODs on the recording. I think you said something that kind of stuck with me, regarding like the Cambridge Analytica times. And, when, the real threat wasn't, the immediate someone being able to kind of control what we think, but also kind of pivoting that into how people are feeling, groups of people feeling, and then turning those feelings and controlling what we do with them, which is really kind of scary. So I mean, outside of that, do you think that is kind of still happening? Do you think we're kind of seeing, that evolve in a different form, or touch a little bit more on that?
It's definitely still happening. I would say when I started my career in grassroots politics, probably like 15 or 16. It was surfacing as an issue after a couple of Nepal, Ukraine, a few examples of how social media, if left unfiltered, could facilitate like whole wide scale organization in really small amounts of times. We saw the Ukrainian social uprising overthrow Yanukovych in Ukraine, 2011, 2012. I feel that governments and institutions both made a concerted effort to crack down on and interfere with the agency that we were bestowed by using these technologies. And I had firsthand experience with this. So while most people I don't feel have been able to sense the shift underneath of their feet with the tools that they're using, Facebook today is not the same application that it was in 2015. It doesn't work the same way at all. And the really scary part is that people still they're operating under this illusion that it is the same application, right? When we all fell in love with Facebook, it was a social networking site. It allowed you to reach out to others, connect to them, organize, and produce things of value for yourself and for others. And for that, we loved it. That's why I fell in love with the internet. I don't know about you guys, but today, Facebook is social media, and the social is lowercase. It's really just media, and they use algorithms to spoon feed you exactly what they want you to see at the moment they want you to see it, and they track everything you do to optimize their performance. Not only that, but then they can take that vast amount of data and they can start using those machine learning tools that we mentioned earlier, Cambridge Analytica, and they can begin to leverage all sorts of things in ways that have downstream negative impact. While in 2015, 2016, you could still effectively use Facebook to organize a protest, what we saw during 2016 was a really serious shift. I was a part of some campaign finance protests that targeted the Hillary campaign. At the same time, I'll say I was door-to-door canvassing for the Democrats at that time. But it wasn't Hillary's nomination wasn't a perfect fit for me. So I was out being active in every way that I could. And I took issue, a few of us took issue with the price tags that she was charging for private meetings with her on the campaign. And we worked to organize some 200 volunteers to come out and protest. And what we experienced was that the day before the protest, the administrators were removed from the Facebook event. Several of them were banned from Facebook for a period of time. And then the event information, the location data was changed by Facebook to route participants to an hour away. And the event was only an hour and a half long. So me and the few others who really coordinated the event showed up and immediately began getting notifications, text messages, questions. Where the hell are we? Why am I at a golf course? And that was the last time I ever attempted to use centralized social media to organize a political protest, because for me, I realized then that if I kept trusting this tool and kept trying to use it, I was just giving them more opportunity to persuade me or to pull the wool over my eyes. And I think that a lot of people didn't have the experience where they were actively trying to use the media for something when it got changed or interfered with. And so the illusion has been very effective. People still look at Facebook, TikTok, YouTube, and they think that because I'm seeing a lot of this, it must mean that a lot of people are talking about this. And that's really not the case, I'd say. A lot of the times the information is seeded. And a lot of the times it's just being surfaced and curated because it suits one or the other of these platforms' self-interest. With the advent of generative AI and the ability to produce malicious or false or misleading content just like at scale, and I think that the problem has collapsed on itself here in the past 6 months to a year. We're currently dealing with a situation where you can't have any real degree of confidence that something is or isn't happening just because you see it or don't see it on media sources or media outlets. I think that's the case with the Iran conflict right now. I've had similar conversations with people about our recent bombing, United States' recent bombing of Mexico, and wondering whether or not there have been any retaliation on U.S. soil. And I think those, if you know, you know. But at this point, it's very hard to get a sense of reality unless you have individuals with credibility that you can connect to directly and hear that truth from the horse's mouth.
Yeah, 1000%. No, you're cooking, Swarthy. I love it. I love it. Before we get into this little lightning round, we got a cool little lightning round coming up. I got one more question, kind of bringing it back a little bit to, DAOs and, that experiment, because a lot of this is just experimentation. It is cool to hear, we're adding some letters on there because we need to tighten things up. But, a few people kind of say like, Nouns DAO, raised millions, kind of fell apart. Some people say that, it's a governance failure. I mean, what do you say? What do you think actually kind of took this thing out? What was the problems that went wrong with some of our largest DAOs out there?
Yeah, I think that there's a convergence of issues, right? You have a lot of people who were misled or lied to about the DAO that they were joining, right? And maybe they were lied to in order to facilitate a rug, or so that someone could scam them and fleece them for their investment. Or maybe they were lied to or misled because it was aspirational, and some of these communities wanted to be decentralized and autonomous, and they wanted to be permissionless and fair. But I'll say not that I think. I know firsthand from working with these people 2020, 21, consulting on dozens of DAO launches, that most of these projects had good intentions, but that the primitives that you needed to build out these systems just didn't exist yet. And we didn't really understand how far away we were from having those tools. One of the reasons I'm really excited to be building with Nouns Builder for the past year now, and to be working on DAOs today, is that those primitives do exist where they did not before. And it's really the challenge now is composing them to make systems that work. Oh, yeah. I think so being misled. And then I'll say Nouns is going to come up, right? Because I work with Nouns Builder, where you can fork and deploy your own Nounish community in a few moments with no code. That means you can launch an auction that sells one vote, say one vote a day, one vote an hour, whatever you choose for your time period. And those the sale price of that vote goes into a community treasury. And that vote is used to determine what you guys do with that treasury, if anything, if nothing. Now, that doesn't meet the criteria of a DAO natively. One of Dan Larimer's criteria of a DAO is that a DAO cannot depend on assets. A DAO's function can't depend on assets over which it isn't self-sovereign. And that means like things that it can't, its purpose can't depend on things that it doesn't have full control over. Otherwise, it's not autonomous. So by that definition, Nouns and all communities on Nouns are not a DAO. If their sole purpose exists to accumulate and distribute Ethereum, which is an asset over which they have no control, then what we saw with the original DAO is that the Ethereum network can fork and decide that those balances don't actually belong there, and then you have no function, no agency, no purpose. So I think that something that people should consider when they're talking about DAOs is that they're bigger than it's not just one simple governance mechanism. Put money in a pot and vote, right? That's not a DAO, that's plutarchy, right? We had a word for that for a long time. But I think that people expect a lot out of this technology. They're promised a lot, and then they expect a lot without really looking under the cover to see what can we really execute on today.
Yo, B, I don't think I can hear you.
That's okay. He's figuring it out. But yeah, go ahead, Zolf. What are your thoughts?
I love it. Like what you just said there at the end. I think it's super important. I love the whole concept of DAOs, so I'm really interested in diving deeper into that conversation. And two of the things that you said that I really enjoyed was the ODOS, the optimized DAOs, as well as the conversation around the self-sovereign assets and how do we create self-sovereign assets for some of these DAOs and some of the things that you're, working on here currently with different projects. But yeah.
Well, something neat to check out is, so Nouns Builder today, we just pushed some updates over the past few months. And what we are working towards is giving these communities, these aspirational DAOs, the ability to create and govern their own self-sovereign assets, right? I butt heads with some people in DAO design sometimes because I still believe a DAO should have money, right? Like money is agency, whether it's Ethereum or the US dollar. Liquidity gives you agency, the ability to affect change on the world around you. And that's the reason that we create organizations, so we can collectivize our self-interest and leverage for change. So on Nouns Builder today, you can still run your auction and accumulate Ethereum, but we've created using Zora contracts, and in the future our own contracts. We've allowed these communities to be able to just deploy their own token, their own ERC20, right, a coin, and to govern the distribution of that community currency, over which they do have full control. And I'm really excited about that because it didn't exist like 6 months ago, right? And now the communities that have been these aspirational DAOs that have been building on Nouns Builder for years now, they get a shot at experimentation and iteration for the next iteration of what DAOs will be.
Solid, loving it. My back, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Perfect. All right, that's what's up. All right, let's shift gears a little bit. Come with a little lightning round for the next, few minutes on this one, Swarthy. One sentence on it, just off the top. One sentence on where ETH actually is right now in its current state. One sentence.
I think I would say Ethereum is resolute right now. The Ethereum network opened itself up to a lot of maybes that didn't happen, and we're holding strong. We're staying focused.
I like that. Did define resolute? hit that. Spell it one more time. Did DAOs deliver on their promise? One sentence.
I would say that there's never been a true. The only thing that approximates a true DAO is the Ethereum network itself. And in that sense, I don't think the Ethereum network has let me down. So yeah, and I think the promise of DAOs should be that it's an experimentation, that it's an aspiration. If someone tells you that it's a reality today, don't listen.
I like that. Biggest thing this space got wrong.
I think you mean the Ethereum space?
Yeah. Or DAOs. Whoever got the biggest wrong.
I think opening ourselves up to making the switch to proof of stake was premature.
Okay.
When we weren't ready to scale and we didn't have the additional standards that we hoped would give the Ethereum network its competitive edge, maintain its competitive edge. I think that, yeah, it may have been a mistake to move as early as we did with proof of stake.
That's a good reminder for sure. Even though it was successful and we did get through that, but yeah, no, I agree with that being premature for sure. All right, I see you, Swarthy. W lightning round, you got through that unscathed, my man. I appreciate you. All right, let's kick it over to Z. Z, what we got going on next, man?
Yeah, dude, we're talking here now about we'll talk more about Ethereum. I think that's perfect. You said the only successful DAO so far has been Ethereum, and recently, in the past few months, the founder of Ethereum, Vitalik, has written a lot of interesting documentation around some of these topics that we're kind of brushing on today. So I'd love to dive deeper into some of these topics because he's been thinking at a very high level of where after this amount of time that Ethereum's been out, where we are today and where we're going forward. I mean, in the last, I think week, they put out a full document towards an Ethereum Foundation mandate. Would love to know just overall where you said it's been successful. Where do you feel? Have you read all of these kind of different pieces, and how do you feel about some of his writing as a founder looking at Ethereum today?
Yeah, I've read a lot of Vitalik's work, and I usually, when I read it, feel less alone in the world. It's usually a couple of weeks after I start chewing on something academically, or trying to figure something out, toying with a set of ideas, and then Vitalik will make a post that illustrates to me that he's been thinking about those same things, which to me at least shows me that the problems that I see are seen by others, and if at least hopefully they're real and I'm not hallucinating them, but they're at least seen by others, and that the direction I feel that I'd like to move to attempt to solve them is something that I'm not alone in, that these things seem to make sense, and that others are incredibly motivated in getting them done. And in the case of Vitalik, he has way more resources than I do. So it's really great to know somebody out there with more resources than me is working on the stuff I want to see made.
Yeah, 1,000,000%. Wow, that's bars. That's cool to hear. I think in chatting more with you and talking more about all the things we're working on personally and seeing where your perspective in Web3 and background has been, it's always been an interesting conversation, diving deeper into the organizational and governance structures of society, but then also the Ethereum, the world computer, where we could potentially have a future society, and we now have that solution to something. I would love to, if you were going to chat with a new person about Ethereum and explain why it's a solution to problems today, what would your go-to be? I know you have a history of having that conversation with others. If you don't have a lot of that context, where do you initially go?
Yeah, I stick with social contract theory 2.0. And, even some people, they're like, what's social contract theory? That's living in the United States for you. But I digress. It's easy enough to explain to someone who doesn't know what social contract theory is, how it resulted in our modern governmental institutions, and how much we rely on it. And I tell people all the time that, today I speak to their frustrations about being locked into systems that they don't have any agency over, right? I speak to people a lot about how they don't perceive the government to be responsive to their needs, or how infrastructure providers have an outsized control, or third-party distributors take all their money. That's a very common complaint from artists. And I try to get them to imagine what it would be like if they were able to opt in and out and govern these institutions, not in the traditional sense, like bureaucratically by participating and voting, but with their presence. by using it. That if they were given an option to opt in and out of like multiple versions of the United States government that were competing with one another, and get them to imagine how much agency that would give them in their own life. And that usually works. People just sort of start to think, well, that's too good to be true.
Yeah,
it's a really good analogy.
Yeah, wow, I've never heard it like that. I like that a lot. I always try and use the analogy right now of the driver driving a car, and right now you need to be a mechanic to understand how to drive the car. But in an ideal future, you as a user and consumer can just turn the keys and hope and trust that and have the security and validation of knowing if you're going 80 miles down the road, the car's not going to just break down on you, even though you don't know how it all works, right? And I think right now we're at a point where you have to know how it all works to really take full advantage of that. So I'd love to know, what are your thoughts on helping bridge this knowledge gap that, when you said initially at the beginning of this conversation, many people are ill-informed about crypto, how do you want to help get that portion of the people that are ill-informed more informed immediately as they kind of learn more about crypto?
Good question. I think something you said there, you went to say trust, and then you corrected yourself and you said secure and validated. And that's where I start with people, because it requires, technology progresses at the rate of people dying, right? So abstracting away from the blockchain and making it all turnkey, it's less and less important the more boomers pass away and the more youth grow up with this technology. But I think there's a fundamental shift in institutions that operate based on trust, because that was the best we could do. And then we would reinforce that trust by making sure that they could be held accountable through different mechanisms. And that trust was how we could, make decisions and coordinate around future outcomes. But the whole point of Bitcoin was to eliminate trust from the equation, right? And that same benefit applies to the Ethereum network. While it may be out of the norm for people to do their own diligence, I think a good way to speak to them and to get them to start doing their own diligence, to not trust, but to verify, because this has to be a part of our human systems as well as our automated systems. That people are very susceptible, and systems are susceptible to manipulation if you just take things at their word with no underlying proof. And I speak to a lot of people's desire to make money on crypto, because that's why most of them care in the first place. And they've maybe been burnt on a bad investment and lost some money, right? And I'll let them know that I've personally, this changed last year. I bought a lot of meme coins, project coins. I did, I had some fun on the blockchain last year. But before that, when I was making an investment, or what I saw as an investment, there were some steps I would go through every time before I would ever consider buying the token. Things like check in for the technical documentation. Look at how often that documentation was being updated and how many people were working on it. Make sure that there was a way for me to communicate to that organization. So do they have a Discord server or not? Do they have a public forum or not? And the presence or absence of those things could tell you a lot about the security of your investment. If you have a direct line to contact the founder of the project, you have a lot more ability to hold them accountable, not trust that they're going to be accountable, hold them accountable. And so, for the first 5 years I was in crypto, those were the only assets I bought. If I could find the docs, if I could talk to the developers, if I could have my questions answered and feel like I really felt this technology was valuable in some way, regardless of whether or not consumers started to use it or pick it up, right? But that it added value that would eventually be adopted because it just made sense and it made people money.
Well said. I love it. I think my last question specifically about Ethereum here is going to be, if you had to give Ethereum a grade over the course of years, you could even say cycles, like different periods of time, what grades would you give it, and why would you kind of give it those grades?
Grade the Ethereum network?
Yeah, so like over time, right? Like where it started to where it is now, how would you rate that progression? And if you want, you can split it up into different segments.
I think it's hard to give them a grade because it would be comparative. And I don't think there's anything else in the world like the Ethereum network. There is no other sufficiently decentralized, smart contract enabled blockchain on the planet. Every other blockchain out there besides Bitcoin is a centralized institution, at best making attempts to decentralize, and at worst pulling the wool over your eyes so that you don't realize how much you're actually trusting them. And I think there's a myriad of things that could be criticized. Like I personally believe, proof of stake came a little too early. But the challenges that we're actually surmounting using this technology, the ability to coordinate talented developers from all around the world who never need to meet each other in person, and they can somehow agree to update a technology that already has a substantial financial value, right? When we moved from proof of stake or proof of work to proof of stake, that was a serious risk for people's investments. It needed to be accepted by investors and consumers, and we didn't know whether that was going to be the case. But we were still able to coordinate that and to see it through, and that's miraculous. That's not something that was possible 10 years ago. I just think that the type of global and equitable society that I want to live in is only a possibility because of the Ethereum network. So if I had to give them a grade, I would give them an A. But that doesn't mean that there aren't many things that we could have done better. And that doesn't mean that there's not a lot of area or room for us to improve.
Well said. Damn, I love that. I think there's a lot of good parallels there where because it is in this one of its kind, it's going to have to make just technical learning mistakes because no one else has ever touched that outer brim, right? Like once you go past the event horizon of a black hole, you no longer can see what's behind you and no one's ever been there, right? Or maybe it's not that, but that's kind of what I kind of envision, right? So I really like that you kind of put it together really well at the end there of like a succinct, honestly clipped version of like why Ethereum is so powerful, all these developers able to agree on decisions of code and create a sufficiently decentralized network. So yeah, no, I'm super glad to have you here. I'm super glad to work with you on a lot of different projects. I'd love to dive maybe briefly into the different things you're working on now, and have you share a little bit about what's going on in 2026. What have you done with all of this learning and kind of bringing it to the Ethereum network?
Yeah, so what I'm building what I've been building for the past year, I guess I'm building it in the sense that I'm writing a lot about it, thinking a lot about it, talking to people about it a lot. But I've been building a multi-tiered governance model that works to balance the interests of different stakeholder types in like a perpetual tension. Building a governance game. And it's not simple, so I won't waste too much time talking about how it works. But to keep it high level, we have 3 different assets that we use to help determine voting power. And we use them in different combination depending on the type of decision being made. And the idea is to preserve the separation of powers that were able to provide us with the most stable democracies we've seen to date. I think something that makes me cringe a lot is when people they've experienced one DAO and they're like, I hate DAOs. DAOs are pointless. And it's like, do you think we got bureaucracy right the first time? Is government simple? Is the United States government a simple thing? Hell no, it's not. Absolutely not. So I don't understand. I think people are asking quite a lot of DAOs to say I should be able to understand you in a few minutes. And I want you to always get it right. So the systems I designed are living experiments, and there's always ways to change them from within. And then there's ways for the different stakeholder groups to leverage change on one another. The goal being to optimize the best performance for the most number of stakeholders over time. And where we're applying that right now is in an attempt to decentralize news media and nonfiction documentary production. I see this as this shift in my work, this focus has a lot to do with reading Vitalik's recent Balance of Power blog and realizing that I wasn't crazy and I wasn't alone in thinking that now was the time to push network technology, decentralized ledgers technology as the new manifestation of the fourth estate. And for those who don't know, the fourth estate is the mechanism by which the populace, you and I, regular people, can hold power accountable. At one point, it was the church, which used moral accountability to leverage kings and queens. Then we had universities, and then more recently, we had the free press. But as we discussed in the beginning of this call, the free press is just press. And it's more like a propaganda machine that has a vested interest in persuading you to think or behave one way or another. And I don't think that I think the Ethereum network is built for this, for being able to facilitate community curation, validation, real-time coordination, and distribution of authenticated information. And so I'm excited to be working with the community of career journalists, some been in journalism for decades, some who have focused on decentralized media, and then some really awesome systems engineers to start to tackle the problem of how can we curate high value and authenticated signal around data verticals or content areas that have an impact either on your wallet or on your life.
I wanted to jump in. I hate that I'm clearing my throat when I start talking, but I love that you just brought up that article, because I read that article and prepped for this interview right after you brought it up to me. Like, I'd never heard of the fourth estate until I met you. And I kind of have this sense, right, that in balance of power, right, he's arguing that big business, big government, and big mob are all getting stronger at the same time, that the natural counterweights no longer exist, right? They're being eroded. And his conclusion is that now we deliberate architectural design systems that pit these forces against each other to keep anyone from dominating, And it sounds to me like, right, being a little bit more familiar with IYK YK than most, right, that's really the three token design that you're generating. And I'm curious, if you were to make the case directly to him, how would you articulate that this is what he's calling for? Because it occurs to me, like, I see the parallel like so succinctly.
Yeah, it's actually kind of been a little eerie to be like reading some of it's like, is he listening to my conversations or is he in my head? But I think it really just is good to know that I'm simpatico with others in the world trying to solve the same problem. And I think it makes my life easier. I don't have the same recognition, credibility, or resources that Vitalik and the Ethereum Foundation do. And I've been a little disappointed the past 5 years with sort of the level of the volume of leadership signal coming out of the Ethereum Foundation, because they have such an important role having having that credibility and having our attention. But it definitely makes it easier to activate human resources and capital to start to solve this problem. The fact that Vitalik is being so vocal. And so please stay vocal, get more vocal, and know that you have a lot of people around the world willing to back you up. And so you're not going to be the only one saying it.
Damn. Bars.
I think it's so sick. Maybe he's got like an AI agent listening to you on Discord talk about governance, and he's like, I think that it's getting the summary. Like, this is the one. This is the guy. I appreciate letting me jump in, Saul. I know you were really on a sprint right there, but something else that kind of stands out for me is that you're not really super attentive, or I wouldn't say attentive, right, but really involved with the EF stuff. I know you've been going to ETH Denver for a couple years. But you've kind of been in your corner of crypto, right, with the governance, with the Nouns DAO, and now at Nouns Builder. And I'm curious, right, knowing that they want this segment to be funded, right, public goods, how do we protect information? How do we really support people finding the truth and the truth reaching them. What do you feel like has kept you from approaching the EF or being in the DMs of these people? Or maybe you already have been. I'm curious, like, what's been your reluctance there?
So my first foray into crypto took me pretty far away from the ETH Foundation and core alignment. Like I said, we didn't realize how early we were and how many primitives we lacked. And I started a startup called Athena Protocol, which worked with Ocean Protocol technology. And it was basically giving people ownership over the data and a split of the revenue when someone would learn on your data and train an AI model on it. We were way too early for consumers. And I got very bogged down in the success that we experienced. Like, we were funded from public goods channels, from some angel investors. And so I put a toe into the water of the crypto space, and I was swimming in minutes. And it took me some time, I'd say probably about 1.5 years, to realize that I'd been pulled away from my original intentions, from my focus, and from my passion. We were succeeding at work in what we set out to do, but my day-to-day work, my contribution to the company was less and less and less of what I really wanted to be doing. And I did see Vitalik once in person here, I think at ETH Denver. But what I was so new to the system and didn't have any other people to converse with about it, to be able to check myself. Does this make sense to you? This is what I see when I look at the Ethereum network, but am I insane? And so I still had a lot of imposter syndrome, and I didn't really feel like comfortable approaching him. And then in the past couple of years, the Ethereum Foundation really hasn't been equipped to provide a lot of support. Guidance, mentorship, yes. Legal, maybe not so much, because we have no idea. And, but definitely not financial support for real open source projects, like for real public goods. And that's changing right now. So I look forward to getting in touch with the Ethereum Foundation this year. Maybe this is the year that I meet Vitalik and we get to have face-to-face and a heart-to-heart. That would be amazing, I think. Yeah. But yeah, I guess just circumstances conspire. We're all very busy. And then we're not quite there with, what IYK YK wants to do, and with what Farcaster helps do and other communications technologies, where it can still be kind of hard to get the right signal. Even if you're actively looking, I'm sure Vitalik's day is full of looking through tech projects and founders and doing all of that, but there's just so much that we need a better ways for communities to be able to curate and indicate the value that they take out of work so that signal can rise to the top.
Yeah, that's well said. I like that a lot. I'm interested to hear more about how you'd have that conversation. But I'll kick it back over to Maseo. I think we're approaching about an hour here, and would love to just like overall hear just like thoughts. Like I'm pretty blown away by the conversation. There's a few things I knew about you, and many things that I learned. But I think just having some more perspective on where you fit into the puzzle of Ethereum is a really good thing for anyone who's listening in or kind of comes back to this, because I think that there's so many things that can be possible now that we're working on. And like you said, the primitives weren't there yet for a lot of the ideas you had in the past, but I think we're getting closer and closer to a future that can actually realize some of those ideas. So excited to work on them with you here. It was a blast hearing you have this conversation. I don't know, Maseo, I'm sure you had a couple more questions. I don't know, B, if you had a couple more questions, but I just wanted to give that roundabout at the top of the hour. Shout out to everyone who came in. I think there was a question as well from the chat about how IYK YK differentiates from independent journalists on YouTube, Substack, Patreon. What additional benefit does it bring?
I love that question. Thank you. Whoever asked, I don't think I'm getting the.
It's a nacho.
I'm seeing your guys' messages in the chat, but not the community. So, how does it differentiate from independent? So, someone I've had the pleasure of working with recently in the IYK YK community used to work for Medium, and left due to censorship issues that arose early in Medium. But what they share frequently is that they believe that services like Substack, Medium, and others have actually done a disservice to the public in some ways by creating the impression that ethical journalism can be done independently. That doesn't mean there can't be ethical and successful independent journalists, but those journalists do not work in a vacuum. They rely on a network of support, financial, and what's the word? Memetic, but that's a little bit out there. So, information. They work with fact checkers. They work with editors. They work with firsthand sources and secondhand sources that can refer them to firsthand sources. It takes a village to make something like impartial, unbiased, objectively true news. And as individuals working alone, we cannot help but inject our personal bias. Even if it comes down to making my best efforts to do so, I still don't know what I don't know, and that's going to work its way in. So the goal with IYK YK is to replace the support that centralized institutions provide to journalists with decentralized network support. We use agentic tools and knowledge graphs to make it so that you can create digital copies of yourself and be an always-on mentor and consultant for other reporters in your network. And we're also going to be working to create similar tools to help with creating custom licensing and royalty and distribution agreements, and then to create a competitive game for the allocation of funding to support that media production.
Love it.
Yeah, it's fire.
Yeah, I appreciate Nacho Ninja asking that question. Shout out to the ninjas out there. I think it's sick you got the live chat going. That was you doing like a ninja chop?
Yes, that was my attempt.
I fuck with it. My final line of questions is really just like, what's your call to action for the journalists out there, for the independent publishers, what's your call to action to those of us who are exploring that space and figuring out like, how do we hit our stride? How do we make this sustainable? How do we actually find community and those network effects? Like whether or not we're building on your protocol, how do we start to organize and coordinate in a way that really leaves us, flourishing,
I think my call to everybody, all journalists or non-journalists, like if you care about being able to make sense of the world around you and make personal and economic decisions that have security and that that you can have faith in the future, that you should learn about the Ethereum network. You should learn about decentralized technologies, and you should start using them. And when you have issues or complaints with them, you should find somebody who can help you solve them, because that's what we're here to do. These aren't finished products. This isn't, this is a living system that we're building out. And I'd also encourage you guys, journalists, to think a little more about the range of issues that journalism currently faces. I know I hear a lot of journalists talking about censorship resistance, and that is a big one. It's one that is really easily remedied by publishing your data to IPFS or on chain. But being resistant to censorship doesn't mean that you are impervious to being silenced. A lot more important today, I feel, once you've managed to put your information online in a secure, decentralized storage so it can't be taken down, is how do you get people to give it the time of day? How do you get people to take it seriously? Because without the institutions providing credibility, we don't have alternatives. And I think that I find that's the case a lot of the time with my own work. I try to write prolifically, but I write articles on a regular basis to explore the things I've been thinking about, the solutions I've been considering. And I for years, I've never really gotten much of an audience because I don't play the consumer monetization game to push my articles as content. And if I did start to play that game in an attempt to get in front of a broader audience or have more credibility, I would lose alignment with what it is I'm actually trying to say. So for me, it's always been, I'd rather just produce what I really want to produce and get it out into the world. But I think right now it's a systemic and societal problem that we all share, that we need to be able to cooperate with one another in getting accurate information out into the world. So if you are an independent journalist, find a community. That doesn't need to be a community of other journalists. Maybe it's the community that reads your work. Maybe it's the community that you report on. But work with others to help address this problem.
Hell yeah. And then my last question is, who do you think, like, as someone who's been paying attention, right, to the ecosystem, to how it's evolved, who's someone you feel like that's doing some of the most important work on Ethereum mainnet that's not really getting the recognition they deserve?
Well, Nouns Builder. I'm not on the tech pod there. I don't do any of the real building. Do a lot of talking and designing. But the tech pod from Nouns Builder are 2 members of Raid Guild. And I'd say I shout out the Raid Guild in general. That's very talented developers working on a large number of projects that if they're working on it, you should probably check it out. But our tech pod members, Dan and Benedict, have within just the past year, I think a little less than, or maybe right at a year, they've been able to take quite a mess of like backlog code and what a community that the founders had moved on, and that many people were writing it up. The Nounish complaints about the Nounish model, DAOs are dead, and the community I have the privilege of working with in Nouns Builder has stayed focused on what we know we can do to add value and how we know we can set the next generation of DAOs up for success, regardless of consumer interest or lack thereof, regardless of the public or the current public opinion about DAOs or the notion people have about them. And I encourage you to check out our community, but also there are the other projects that the Raid Guild members are working on. I don't know all of them personally, but I have yet to see a project that they take under consideration that isn't seriously about adding value back to the Ethereum network.
No, I love that shout out. Shout out to Nouns Builder. I actually didn't realize that the tech pod was 2 people from Raid Guild. When I went to DevCon, when I went to MCon, right, the DAO conference in Detroit, 2024, I was there with the founder of Raid Guild and some other homies from over there, and they were so dope. So I think it's absolutely sick that you're working with them. I know they take on like such impressive projects and are helping people on board, right, in different kinds of ways as well. So shout out to them and shout out to you, right, for just caring about helping us build the kinds of entities and organizational structures that can disrupt corporations, nation states, and all the systems that just don't work for us every day. So thanks for paying attention to that stuff, and thanks for being, our fourth estate. That's what I'll call you.
I like that. I like that a lot.
With the noggles on. All right. Well, thank you everybody for listening. I'll pass it over to you, B, if you have any final words, or use all. But I'm so grateful that you're one of our early guests on this series. I want people to get that this isn't just about technology, right? But it is about, right, how do we build systems that work for everybody? How do we start to imagine a more pluralistic future, right, where we have more choices, but also more things evolving, more experiments running all the time, right, and cultures we can opt and choose into. So I think it's sick what you're doing over at Nouns Builder, and that you're helping people build, right, the tools so we can launch our community and create governance structures where we can actually make choices together, and not disenfranchise each other in the process, because people hate that shit.
Facts. No, for sure. Appreciate you, Swarthy, man. Keep killing it. Appreciate everything that you've done, for the larger humanity, but also, adjacent to a bunch of the communities that we're involved with. So shout out to you. So keep killing it. Appreciate you sitting down with us. It was an amazing conversation. I learned a whole bunch. So yeah, it's all good. And shout out to chat coming through. Yeah, of course.
Yeah, no, thanks. Thanks for coming on, Swarthy. Excited to see what comes. What the next action things that we kind of like do here together as a community, whether that be the four of us and more, all the folks in the stream, and appreciate everyone for popping in today. You especially, Swarthy Hatter, and then my two co-hosts as well. So yeah, super excited about where we're going as a whole. Definitely check out IYK YK, everything else Swarthy Hatter is doing. We've been working together for the last 6+ months, and it's been an absolute pleasure. So it's great to sit down, learn a little bit more about what you're doing, and dive in deeper. So yeah, I'll kick it back to you, Ms. Ale, to give us our closing words.
Yeah, closing remarks. Well, I think everything you said was excellent, man. Thank everybody for being here. Thank you, Swarthy, one last time. And, I like to say good luck to the ecosystem, building the world computer and, making the difference. And shout out to everybody who's taken the initiative to build, to make a difference when the incentives are to build and make money right now. We could be building Corpo Slop, we could be building stablecoin rails. And shout out to everybody who's not just thinking about the finances, but really how do we start to build what ETH was designed to build, the promise, right, of a world that works for everybody, that has a decentralized stack that can compete with the centralized stacks we're used to. And so thanks everybody for listening. And yeah, looking forward to next time. Peace.
Ciao.